I've played tons of PS1 games, and as of 2024, I've beaten 128 out of the 4,105 games on the system. That being said, I've encountered games that were good and some that were bad, but today we're going to talk about 10 games you should check out on the PS1 if you have the time. Games that made me stop and go, lean forward in my chair, even though I know my back can't handle it. Now, these aren't the best games on the PS1, they're just simply 10 games worth checking out. Let's begin. Air combat was a great time on the PS1. Ace Combat 3 Electrosphere was a labor of love, but the game that came between, Ace Combat 2, is a masterpiece in air-to-air combat games from the era. I know I mentioned in a previous episode that this game was competing with Aerofighter's Assault, but as you can see from the footage, Aerofighters really didn't stand a chance. With accurate representations of real-life aircraft, some of which I've fixed personally, I was impressed with the attention to detail that Namco had in the development of this title. In every possible way, Ace Combat 2 was a representation of Namco's abilities to develop on the PS1, and I strongly suggest you check it out. The most recent title was Ace Combat 7, but I was kinda disappointed in it. I miss the classic dogfights, and those drones, they suck. Victus! This game is fun. It's the start of the Legacy of Kain franchise, which was a fun series of games published by Crystal Dynamics way back when. We play as Kain, who is a statesman that is murdered and resurrected as a vampire. So naturally we do vampirical things like suck blood from monsters and humans to refill our health, and walk around beating the shit out of literally anything that breathes. It's a non-linear title that enables you to freely explore the region while learning new spells and defeating the Circle of Nine, which in this game is a group of folks who act as the boss enemies. There's tons of weapons which affect enemies differently, and a majority of the game is a dungeon crawl from a top-down perspective, which I didn't mind. Now the thing that sucks is that the Legacy of Kain franchise has been kind of neglected, and Crystal Dynamics was sold to Eidos, which was sold to Square Enix and rebranded as Square Enix Europe, so that franchise still exists. It'll just be up to Squeenix to decide if it's worth coming back. The most recent game was Legacy of Kain Defiance, and I've heard mixed reviews from my friends about it. Oh well. This is a rather obscure one, and it's one that I have the speedrun world record in because at one point in time I had a wild hair at my ass to beat it as fast as I could. I remember buying this from Sam's Club. I didn't even own a PS1, but I knew that I could play PS1 games on my PS2, so why not? It looked cool. Rebellion Developments designed this, and Ubisoft published it, but as a kid, I didn't recognize either of those companies, and little did I know that they would both become very important to me as an adult and my children as they embarked on their own gaming adventure. Gunfighter is a shooter that supports a gun con, but I didn't own a gun con as a kid, so I just used the controller, and I can comfortably say that even though this is a mediocre game in presentation, it's really fun once you get invested into it. There was a sequel, but it was only released in the European regions. One day I hope to check it out. This is a game that you'll either love or hate. It's a Myst franchise game, or as many of you like to call it, what the fuck did that switch do? I love games like this, and I believe it stems from my love of puzzles and point and clicks, and in many ways that's exactly what Cyan Studios did. They blended those two elements together to make a challenging franchise that most people overlook or move past. Riven is the second game in the Myst series, and it's a rather large game. It was a massive undertaking, and because of that, it's on 5 discs. And as a little extra tidbit of knowledge, each of those 5 discs house an entire level, so if you do play this, be prepared to constantly change discs as you travel to different places on Riven. The plot is kinda convoluted, and I'm sure I'll get this wrong because there's tons of novel-based lore for Riven, but basically you show up to Riven and you have to help Atris rescue his wife Catherine and subdue Gain, who is Atris's father. He's a sociopath that really sucks at writing, because his world is crumbling. That's a trope in the Myst franchise. The Dunny people have a gift known as the Art, and that art is crafting worlds with words and using linking books to travel between them. Riven is worth a shake if you just want to veg out and explore a world, but I will say it is not for everyone. The most recent game in the Myst franchise was Myst 5: End of Ages, but Cyan still develops Myst-style games to this day, with the most recent being Firmament. I didn't know what to expect going into Silent Hill, but I know I did expect it to be expensive, because every single game in the franchise is pretty expensive. As I started playing, I noticed tons of things that I enjoyed. My map would mark off areas that I couldn't access or that I've previously checked out. My objective was circled in red, and that aided me in my progression. When exploring the level, these previously mentioned elements paved the way for a genuinely fun experience, and it tends to take the focus of what do I do next and throws it out the window in favor of allowing the player to be immersed in the ambiance of the town of Silent Hill. Now, much like Resident Evil, it still has tank controls, but for some weird reason, I felt the tank controls in Silent Hill were more responsive than in Resident Evil. Maybe it's just me. In the game, we play as Father of the Year, Harry Mason, and we're in the town of Silent Hill trying to find our daughter Cheryl. That's literally it. It's up to you to discover the rest of the story. The most recent game is supposed to be Silent Hill F, but I have no clue what Konami expects from Neobard's Entertainment. Time will tell. In the year of our Lord 1996, Takuro Fujiwara and Shinji Mikami worked together to create the first in a long-standing franchise and staple of the survival horror genre, Resident Evil, known as Biohazard in Japan. Now, I will comfortably say I absolutely adore this game, but I fucking hate the camera. I know that from a psychological perspective, Japanese horror mostly relies on the enemy within our minds, versus American horror that largely consists of monsters. And if those two schools of thought did the horizontal sausage slam, we get Resident Evil. That being said, the camera to me is a major downfall for the game. The tank controls and jagged cuts to different angles, those two in combination, they're just really tough to get used to. But once you do get used to it, you're in for a treat. You either play as Chris Redfield or Jill Valentine, who each have their own benefits. Now, in my playthrough, I played as Jill, which set me up for Chris B, or Scenario B, because there's two halves if you really want to get your money's worth. The game only takes about 3 days to beat. In my opinion, it's worth it. The most recent Resident Evil mainline title was RE Village, and I don't expect this franchise to go away anytime soon. Capcom is one of those companies that actually respects their legacy franchises, unlike Konami. One of my favorite games on the Super Nintendo is Chrono Trigger, so I was excited to check out Chrono Cross, and more importantly, the visual novel that bridges the gap, Radical Dreamers. That being said, you don't need to check out Radical Dreamers to understand Chrono Cross, but I will say that the character options in Chrono Cross are massive, the music is astonishing, and the battle system is broken! Yeah, this game uses like elemental affinities and zones where certain actions are color-based. In some ways, it's like rock, paper, scissors to see what color affects others. But in the end, I found Chrono Cross to be an enjoyable experience worthy of your time. All I ask is that you don't approach it thinking it will be like Chrono Trigger, because it isn't. Chrono Cross has an incredibly obtuse storyline that really takes some comprehension to understand, because in some ways, it feels like they just had a coke binge and threw storylines together. If you can look past that, though, you'll be in good hands. As a direct competitor to Diddy Kong Racing, Crash Team Racing is a kart racer with seemingly endless replayability. In the single-player mode, much like Crash Bandicoot itself, you can race multiple times to earn different trophies, and there are boss battles / races. I found the overall experience rather enjoyable. Now, that isn't saying Diddy Kong Racing isn't good. Diddy Kong Racing, in my opinion, was better than Mario Kart 64 in every comprehensible way, but on the PS1, as a kart racer, Crash Team Racing did the job. It has many of the tropes that were popular in kart racers at the time, such as power-ups, drift-based boosting, rubber banding, and speed improvements due to currency pickup, which in the Crash universe is the Wampa fruit. The steering in this game is incredible, and honestly, I enjoyed the hell out of this game. It was remastered in 2019 with Crash Team Racing Nitro Fueled, and Beanox did a wonderful job of giving a fresh coat of paint to this game. Wild Arms is another JRPG, and may I say, one of the best I've ever played. If there's anything I've learned about the PlayStation 1 through my years of exploring its library, is that it was a bastion for strong JRPGs with riveting storylines, awesome combat, and worlds worth exploring. Mediavision was the company responsible for this, and you might recognize them for not only the Wild Arms franchise, but other franchises such as Valkyria Chronicles. As a JRPG, I find that Wild Arms just isn't as grindy as some of the other games on the platform, and honestly, if there was an entry-level JRPG that I could suggest to you, it would be this one. When it comes to role-playing games, I try to avoid spoiling the plot because RPGs by nature are very plot-intensive. The simplest way to say it is that there are 3 characters that you will run into. Rudy Ruffknot, an arm user, where arms are basically guns, he's also the guy that you control. Jack Van Buris, a swordsman, and Cecilia Lynn Adelheid, a mage. The 3 meet by fate and explore the land of Filgaia to defeat outlaws and ultimately destroy a secret organization dedicated to the destruction of the land. Wild Arms to me was particularly impressive because the load times between rooms or major areas seem somewhat seamless. The battle system is impressive, and I do suggest you check it out. The most recent game was Wild Arms XF for the PSP, and we haven't seen anything in the franchise since 2008. Fingers crossed we will, though. Self-destruct protocol initiated. Between carbohydrates and Area 51 cabinets, I don't know what was more present in pizza restaurants growing up. Area 51 was a staple in many smaller arcades, as was Maximum Force, but I've never beaten the latter. Area 51 is an arcade light gun game created by Mesa Logic that was ported to Windows, the Saturn, and then the PS1. Obviously, we're talking about the PS1 version, and looking at the box, I was really concerned that the game would not be translated well at all. My past experience with arcade-to-home conversions was Mad Dog McCree on the Sega CD, and that was hot garbage. Shockingly, the PS1 entry is incredibly fun, and it's fairly faithful to the original arcade game. The plot is pretty cut and paste. You're part of the Special Tactical Advanced Alien Response Team, or STAR, and you enter Area 51 with the intention of activating a self-destruct sequence for the base. Along the way, you'll run into genetically modified zombies and Kron aliens that have one job: to ruin your day. If you want to relive this time-cherished 90s arcade game, then this is an absolutely wonderful way to do it. And that's it for today. I hope that these games bring you as much joy as they did to me. If you like what you saw, feel free to subscribe to join my retro gaming journey, enjoying titles from when life was just a little bit easier to live. If you get a chance, please consider hitting the thumbs up button. It helps with visibility for the episode. And feel free to comment down below what you believe are some PS1 games that others should enjoy. This is a community through and through, and with your suggestions, maybe we can make someone else's day a little bit better as well. From my family to your family, good energy, good vibes. Fortifier out.